Hello, I'm Awaiting Dawn, and this is the series where we pretend people care about how our songs are made and break down a track from inspiration to execution. Well, in this case, it's not exactly just a track. Today, at long last, we're looking at my EP, Upwards, which was released way back in January now. It's kind of been forever. Now, much of the production on this project is actually really outdated, I think, especially given I'm working on the follow-up EP to this project, like right now. And that one's looking to have a lot better production than this. So I'm gonna skip on a lot of the minute details of the production, since I'm going to cover a lot of those tips later. So I'm going to talk instead about the writing and inspiration and the themes, which are kind of a big deal for this EP. Most of the themes kind of originated from my thoughts about what was happening summer of 2020 with all of the BLM riots and kind of the mental journey that I was taking around that time. My initial feelings, of course, about that situation really come out in the first track, called Enough. This is actually the first track that I wrote for the EP before I even decided to make an EP. The primary idea behind this song is pretty obvious, of course. It's kind of about processing anger and expressing it. So the writing really reflects that with its kind of has this intensity to it and also this complexity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that complexity here, because I really wanted to go for a pretty complex rhythm part for most of the song. You'll notice that as soon as we get into the verse, this verse chorus sort of rhythm that goes through the entire verse into the chorus here is probably the most complex that I've written so far. Just listen to it real quick.
Deceive us. We know of your treachery.
Now this one is I think it sounds the way it does specifically because it's probably one of the longest unique patterns that you'll hear in a section, where usually you'll have a rhythm that repeats in like one or two measures. The basic rhythm repeats. In this one, it takes a whole 4 measures for the rhythm to repeat. Like this entire MIDI clip here is completely unique, each repetition, and each repetition of 4 measures here is 1 unit of this rhythm. So it's a really long, like, unique rhythmic pattern that you don't see that often. I like this because I'm into the more complex types of music, and this really kind of has more depth to it. And it takes a little bit to wrap your head around, which is kind of an aspect I like about a lot of music that I listen to. And while I guess you could say that it sounds kind of random, and that would be valid, it's not really. I can take, for example, rhythmic units and kind of break this up. For example, you have this unit here, that you'll see this 3 notes, dup-ba-dup. That is a simple rhythmic unit. You'll see I've repeated it here, it's repeated here, and then it's inverted here. And so usually what I'll do is I'll take this simple rhythmic unit and then cut it up and flip it around and stuff like this. Like you'll see these are all inversions of this initial rhythm. And then this is like an alternate form. So I'm trying to use simple rhythmic units to make a complex whole. And luckily the backbeat of the snare and the cymbals kind of make the rhythm a bit easier to follow than it would be without it, because the cymbals and everything are playing pretty constantly. So that element kind of makes it easy to follow, even if the basic rhythm is actually really difficult. And speaking of difficult, I need to talk about this transition here into the bridge, which I hope you didn't find that jarring on your first listen if you've listened to this track. But I think even if you thought it was a little jarring, you have to admit it's not as if I picked a random tempo and jumped into it like that. This transition actually brings us to a new tempo and a new time signature. And it uses this technique that I call a triplet pivot. It's a specific rhythmic type of technique, though you could maybe call it a triplet metric modulation or some other nerdy term like that, I guess. But what you need to know is that this rhythm takes the 16th notes of the normal tempo and uses 3 of them in a pattern so that they're treated like triplets in a different tempo. You'll notice here in the drums, the cymbal hits are every 3 16th notes. Specifically right here. And so what happens is I go from this groove here, which is pretty solidly 4/4 here. And I start kind of hinting at the transition here by moving the snare. You'll notice I move it off of the backbeat and onto the backbeat of the 3. So you'll notice every 3 8th notes or 6 16th notes there's a snare, instead of it being every 8. But in this section, this slightly feels like a different feel, but the measure wraps around like a normal 4/4 measure. But this last little bit, it's notated up here as a 6/8 measure. But of course it's not actually a 6/8 measure, it's actually a 4/4 measure in this new tempo. Just like this. 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. So you'll see the actual tempo of the project doesn't really reflect what this feels like, because the pulse now kind of feels like it's happening every 3 16th notes instead of every 4 like it used to. So this little bit kind of works us into the feel as if it's a triplet feel in a different tempo. And then this fill here has 16th notes, regular 16th notes in the new tempo rather than triplets. Like, the triplet feel is kind of implied from the previous section where you're used to that sort of note pattern. So it might feel like this is a triplet feel coming from 16th notes in this tempo, because the 16th notes in this tempo are the triplets of this other tempo. But that fill plays the new 16th notes of the new tempo, and then this extra measure here finally brings us fully into the full feel of this new tempo, which now sounds like a straight feel in this new tempo. You'll notice I've modulated the tempo here, but it flows smoothly because of how this modulation works, where I use the triplets in this section and then change the tempo of the project right here while I change how I'd notate everything so that it flows smoothly across this gap.
An amalgamation of one.
And to transition back, I do a very similar trick where I take the the triplets of this new tempo. You'll notice I have to change the grid to the triplet grid. You'll see these are triplets. And so I start with a fill that has a triplet feel to it. And that allows us to transition into another drum fill here that now feels like it's in the original tempo of the song. Just listen to it real quick and see if you can kind of follow what I'm talking about. So just like ever so subtly, I kind of just felt my way through this transition. It's kind of a bit less cut and dry compared to the previous one, but it follows the same pattern where you're like changing the field from straight rhythm to triplet rhythm to straight rhythm in the new tempo using the old triplets. I hope you could follow that. It's kind of difficult to wrap your head around, but I think if you listen to it a little bit and try to think about the relationships between the triplets and the straight 16th notes, then you might be able to kind of understand how that flows. Another big aspect of this EP is how I develop themes across songs and across the album. I'm going to talk a little bit later about developing themes across the EP,